October is known by some as the spook-ass month, and in case you haven't noticed, video games are kinda scary, and I want to talk about it. This video isn't specifically about horror games or creepypasta stuff per se, but rather spooky things that happen to be in video games, whatever genre they might be. Like I've said before, the scariest things in life are often the things you expect to be whimsical and innocent, but show their true colors after deceptively earning your trust, which is probably why things like "Don't hug me, I'm scared" are so popular. Even though there are still horror topics in gaming, I feel like these topics aren't quite as popular as they used to be, and I think part of that has to do with the fact that the process of making a video game and the limitations therein are far more widely known than they used to be. And since you always fear what you don't understand, the result of understanding things better is that a lot of the mystique that makes things scary to begin with starts to dissipate, and in turn it becomes less scary. But there are still things within those limits that have never been adequately explained, which allows them to stay scary until the end of time. Let's look at Sonic the Hedgehog for a minute. This series has always been a hotbed for creepypasta, with the most popular example being things like Sonic.exe, which is funny because that creepypasta wasn't even particularly good. Sonic R is already terrifying because it's basically Bubsy 3D if it was a racing game, but to add to it, they made this weirdo Tails doll, which also got its own terrible creepypasta made about it. Didn't really need a creepypasta, to be honest. Why is a doll of a character that's already in the game a separate character? Well, according to the wiki, he was a decoy made by Robotnik to lure Sonic into the race to help him find the Chaos Emeralds. Still a bit weird, but at least it's better than Pink Metal Peach, who's honestly probably scarier. Is this from an alternate timeline where she turned to metal? Like that old folktale about that king who was cursed to turn everything he touched to gold? I think for me though, the scariest thing in the Sonic universe is in Sonic CD. Now, if you're playing the Japanese or European version of Sonic CD, the boss music sounds like this. Now let's hear the American version of the same song. What the fuck? You can also hear this music by inputting a specific sequence of selections in the sound test screen, which of course is accompanied by a freaky Guy Fawkes looking Sonic and a message from actual Satan. Or at least that's what everyone thought, until it was revealed that it was just one of the developers' nicknames that translated awkwardly into English. But that doesn't explain the weird demon Sonic. And then there's this picture where he's some kind of twisted humanoid god figure. It's like they predicted Sonic's own legacy and following. Or manifested it. I don't know which is more scary. Then of course there's the US version's Game Over music. You know, I gotta wonder what they were thinking when they made these sequences. Like, did they read a study that said American kids prefer to have nightmares as opposed to, not? Now let's look at Mario. Something that's never quite been explained are all these Hell Valley creatures in Mario Galaxy 2. These weird shadowy figures that peek over the mountain watching you do everything. Their assets are referred to in the game's data as Hell Valley Sky Trees, and the area is referred to as Beyond Hell Valley. Much like the weird Sonic face, this is something that, to my understanding, has never been explained, and that's what makes it so unsettling. And the little information that the file names do provide only raise more questions. Does Mario Galaxy 2 take place in Hell? If so, that might explain why they didn't bring it back for the Mario All-Stars collection. Nothing scarier than that. Oh, and speaking of 3D All-Stars, Mario 64 is a game that gets a lot of attention for what people call liminal spaces. Basically, some people feel that there is an ethereal quality to Mario 64's world that makes it fascinatingly uncomfortable. Because it was basically the first game for new, weird hardware that was unfamiliar, while also being an early 3D game in general, it wasn't practical to go for hyper-realism, and as a result, it feels, in a lot of ways, much more abstract and dreamlike than later 3D games which were much more naturalistic and detailed, which, as it turns out, makes it very good material for spooky fan games. My favorite one being B3313, which is a ROM hack based loosely on pre-release screenshots and videos of Mario 64 in early development. As for the vanilla game itself, I don't find it particularly unsettling personally, but I definitely find the beta a little unnerving. Looking at these screenshots and playing beta recreations, it really does feel like a dream, in that the components are familiar, but the way they're arranged is just not right, and that is one of the most disturbing feelings of all. With most early 3D games, even things that weren't supposed to be unsettling could be very off-putting. Ocarina of Time was the first 3D Zelda, and as an early 3D game, even things that were never meant to be scary are horrifying, like arguments concerning the correct pronunciation of the word ocarina, or the Great Fairy's boobs that can poke out your eyeball. Zelda games did get dark and scary before Ocarina, but even considering that, the Shadow Temple and the bottom of the well really fly out of left field. There's torture devices all over the place, there's blood all over the walls, skeletal hands rising out of the green corpse water, and this motherfucker, this is for 6-year-olds, this is way out of line. What's really terrifying about the bottom of the well is the fact that it's underneath the peaceful Kakariko village the entire time and nobody is conscious of it. It's like I said at the beginning. What did I say? The scariest things are the ones that deceive you with an innocent exterior. That's exactly what this is. I also gotta pay big respects to Majora while I'm at it, because that entire game really nails the feeling of being in a nightmare. There's an omnipresent, unsettling feeling throughout the entire world that is unmatched by any other game in the series. I could make the entire video about this one game if I wanted. Paper Mario Origami King was actually surprisingly creepy at times too, but I think most people who played Super Paper Mario will tell you that the River Twig's bed is just a little bit scarier than, you know, staplers. I mean, personally, I'm more scared of paperclip dispensers, but hey, that's just me. When people talk about games, the big cliche is to describe it as a power fantasy, you know, fulfilling the male fantasy of being a monkey with a gun. Pikmin, not so much. Pikmin is the perfect game to pull some scary nonsense because you're a tiny little insect in a big scary new world full of bigger insects. Don't get me wrong, when you mobilize properly in this game, you can become untouchable, but when all is said and done, your default state is prey. For this reason, the games are already scary at a fundamental level. Everything is trying to eat you or set you on fucking fire. In Pikmin 2, though, it all comes to a head once you enter the submerged castle. This is a cave completely submerged in water, so you can only bring blue Pikmin inside. Which wouldn't be so bad, except that the cave has every single hazard known to mankind. I remember when I saw this, I thought it was a mistake. I thought the developers fucked up, but nope. They wanted me to go in here with only blue Pikmin. You enter, and almost immediately you're assaulted by an onslaught of vicious hazards that blue Pikmin can't survive, while this haunting, ghostly music haunts you in the background. And that's when this happens. The Mother series has always been a dumping ground for weirdo, creepy stuff, but one example I never hear anybody talk about is in Mother 3, where you wash up on this island and get high on mushrooms, and then you start hallucinating a bunch of really unsettling things. You open these mailboxes and are greeted with these very off-putting messages that directly prey upon each of the characters' specific anxieties, and then other characters from the game show up to directly unleash upon their insecurities. This is like 75%-ish through the game, so by this point you've spent enough time with these characters that you have a solid grasp on their fears and their desires. And it makes for a surprisingly uncomfortable moment. Kirby is another series with a lot of weird stuff, but my personal favorite example is the factory in Kirby 64. This uncharacteristically scary music is just blasting as you notice all these animals and test tubes and shit in the background. There's even a theory that Shiver Star is supposed to be Earth, and this factory is a real-world reflection of the consequences of unchecked consumerism, as evidenced by the giant shopping malls on the surface. Some games are just really great at nailing a disturbing atmosphere, even if they're not extremely disturbing by nature. A big part of this is music. Donkey Kong 64 is a great example, where the creepy Castle Dungeon soundtrack just completely knocks it out of the park. This is Grant Kirkhope going sicko mode. Then there's Metroid on the NES. The song that plays in Kraid's lair feels like certain death is one wrong move away. The 3-4 time signature makes it even worse. Just from that, you can tell that this is a different situation from everything else you've encountered so far. It's like a waltz of doom. And speaking of doom, hey, it's Doom! In general, Doom isn't exactly scary, with the possible exception of Doom 3, but really that game's more annoying than scary if you ask me. When you think of classic Doom, you think of metal riffs and chainsaws and blasting demons to bits. That is, unless you play the PS1 version, which replaced the guitar riffs with this unsettling ambience and echoey sound effects. It is a completely different experience. And then Doom 64 took it a step further with dark, moody environments and incredible lighting effects. A very similar thing happened with Quake 2, where on PC and PlayStation it got this badass Sonic Mayhem soundtrack that makes you feel like John Matrix from Commando. But then there's the N64 version, which doesn't have any of that soundtrack, and just by swapping the soundtrack, you go from intense FPS fun time to sci-fi horror masterpiece. There isn't really a thesis to this video, I just wanted to set the mood since October just started and to bring attention to the weirder, spookier aspects of their video games. Hopefully I can talk about a lot of spooky stuff this month, so, you know, if you have any spook-ass ROM hacks you want me to check out, definitely hit me up in the comments. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching and, good night.